Welcome everyone. My name is John Postorino. I'm the CEO of Flycast Partners, and I want to welcome everybody to today's webinar. We're going to be talking about ITIL and its impact service management as a shared language. And we have a distinguished guest that's going to be joining us, and I'll introduce him shortly. But first, let me just talk a little bit about Flycast Partners. So Flycast Partners is a veteran-owned small business. We've been around since 2011. We have approximately 1,600 plus customers in North America. But one of the things I want to draw your attention to is we've done, in excess of 5,600 different service engagements, and it's not consistent on a single platform. We actually represent, as you can see here, 7 different ITSM solutions, and then we partner with people like Mike and his organization, and we talk about ITIL and the ITIL framework. And one thing I want to say that makes us somewhat unique compared to other, I want to say, implementers of ITSM solutions, everybody within our organization is certified as a version 3 or version 4 in ITIL. And that just shows the importance of what we're going to discuss today and the impact it can have on an organization. So when we come in and we start talking to potential customers about solutions, we also talk about a framework, and it's the ITIL framework that Mike's going to discuss here shortly. I need to have a poll question. In fact, what's a webinar without a poll question, of course? But in this instance, we have about 150 different attendees today, and we're trying to understand your level of knowledge on ITIL maturity levels. And so today when we go through this presentation or this webinar, Mike's going to talk about the benefits of ITIL in today's work environment, and some of the benefits. I'm only going to highlight 3. You can go out the internet, and there's tons of information regarding ITIL and its impact on the organization. But you can align business with IT more effectively. You can improve service delivery and have consistency in your delivery, and then you can have greater visibility of IT costs and assets. And these are things that we get asked all the time when we're doing an implementation, and these are things that Mike's can discuss in more detail in a moment. And as we wait for the poll to come back, I'm going to do a tap dance over here and take up some time. And okay, so you can see by the results that 37% of the people on the phone, really, let's just say 37, 20, 26%, really have little to no knowledge of ITIL. So this is a great opportunity for you to start understanding the ITIL framework. And thank goodness we have Mike on here. So here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the introduction of ITIL and its principles. We're going to explain ITIL, or not we, Mike is going to explain ITIL and its roles in service management. And we're going to talk about the service management journey. And Mike will go into some detail on that, and we'll ask some questions. And then at the end, we're going to have Q&A opportunities. If there's something that you ask that we do not get to during this session because of time limitations, we will follow up with you individually via your email. So I just want you to know, if we don't get it to it today, we will get it to you shortly after the webinar is completed. And now let me introduce Mike Victal. So Mike is the president of Auslyn Group, and you can see he's got an exceptional glamour shot here. And from Mike's perspective, this is where he lives. This is the world he lives in. He's a published author of ITIL. He's got 20 plus years experience in this vertical. In fact, more than 20 plus years in this vertical. And Mike is a true trusted partner of Flycast. And so Mike's organization and our organization, so from us, from our perspective as an ITSM solution provider, adhering to this framework, the ITIL framework, Mike aligns with us. So Mike comes in, Mike teaches, which he's going to do today, and he's going to talk more about future classes. And then we complement one another, complement one another within this market space. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mike. Mike, the floor is yours, sir. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you for that. Appreciate that, especially the glamour shot as well. So, yeah, thank you for the introduction. Thank you all for joining us here. We have a really nice showing of individuals here, so I appreciate everybody's time. Speaking of time, we plan to kind of get this presentation to you in approximately 30 minutes or so, and then we'll leave it open for some Q&A, as John had mentioned as well. So what I did want to talk about is as John stated, kind of talk about really kind of the ITIL and where it's at in the playing field, and also I have a couple surveys as well that were in the market out there that we brought in, so we can kind of see maybe where ITIL is at in the marketplace. And then we'll also talk about really where it sits, and maybe even that journey that you can take to go down this path. So when we think about ITIL, it looks like most of us have little to no ITIL. So more than half of us have little to no ITIL experience and what it is. But ITIL's been around for a long time, 30, going on 35 years. And I personally have been doing ITIL since the early 90s, although 8 or 9 of those years I had no idea it was ITIL because we didn't call it ITIL. We just did things like incident management and problem management and change management. Well, guess what we were doing back then? Um, but ITIL is, in fact, as a service management practice, it is, in fact, the #1 adopted service management framework in the world. And we'll talk more specifically about ITIL 4 and what ITIL 4 has actually done to the market, specifically in why we actually, updated the ITIL 4 or the technology fourth revolution. When we start talking about the 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 publications of ITIL, so ITIL, has had a number of books in version 1. We had 2 books in version 2 with many other complementary publications. We had 5 books in version 3. Then the 6th book came along, and then we had many other complementary publications with that, all of which I've been part of with version 1, 2, and 3, and now ITIL 4, and also being privileged to be part of the development team for the publications of ITIL 4. But there's been so many hundreds, and if you look at over the years, thousands of individuals from many, many different verticals in the marketplace have all contributed to the creation of what we now are calling ITIL 4. So we may have a small, authoring team of 7 individuals, but we have many other folks that are contributing to that. And so it's not just, 7 people sitting in a room and hashing out and talking about what ITIL is. It's a global participation. So the subject matter experts of service management have all contributed to, the development of ITIL and ITIL's current framework that we talk about now in ITIL 4. It has become, as they say, kind of the de facto standard for service management organizations or world-class service centers, as we're trying to transform ourselves from an IT-based organization to a truly service-based organization and building that world-class service center, or whatever you may be doing in regards to doing service management practices, processes, tool integration, whatever that might be. This has in fact become the standard, de facto standard for that, although ITIL is not a standard. What ITIL 4 has really done that I really like, I mean, in the beginning when ITIL 4 came out, and again, ITIL 4 has been out for a few years, although stifled by the pandemic globally, certifications are still there, certifications are up, but it's still fairly new to the marketplace, again, because the pandemic kind of stifled a little bit of that. But ITIL 4, from ITIL version 3, ITIL 4 added this really nice wrapper around the entire framework, which we call the service value system. And this really does, you'll see it coming up, this really enhances our ability to think about many, many different aspects of delivering a service and delivering quality and delivering value to our consumers, but we're focusing on different things now. And that's what I really like about what ITIL's done for us in the marketplace, is really kind of shifted our thought process to not just bits and bytes or how many tickets do we close at the service desk. It's a much bigger focus of how do we actually maintain the business to be successful, right? So that's where the service value system comes into play, so that we as an organization can in fact engage more effectively, more efficiently with the right roles and responsibilities and the task, so we can engage to develop and deliver these quality IT services to meet the needs and or exceed the needs of the business as we deem necessary at that particular point in time. Meaning, things change over time, and as our projects can last years, so can visions, missions, goals, and objectives. And we really want to make sure we stay in tune with what those modifications are, and we can intervene as we deem necessary to make sure we do in fact stay focused on what has been tasked for IT to deliver to enable the business to be successful. Because IT is inseparable from the business. So the benefits of IT to the business, I mean, and in many cases, legally, you cannot run your organization without IT for a lengthy period of time. Some will say, yeah, we can return to manual, but no, we need to integrate. We are the business, and the business is in fact IT. We are one, as one really informative CEO attended one of these conferences a while back, said we don't have IT projects, we only have business projects. And it was a phenomenal quote, because he said every time we're going to spend money, we need to map that money or those expenditures back to the needs of the business, and how does that enable our business to be successful. And ITIL is in fact the de facto standard to make that happen for us. And we'll see again, we'll see the framework here in a little bit. One thing that ITIL 4 has also done for us, which I'm a big fan of as well, that we've actually written in our Direct Plan and Improve publication, was the use of emerging technologies and taking into consideration other practices around the globe. So we don't just talk about ITIL anymore. We talk about how ITIL is very complementary to many other industry practices, and we'll see that coming up here again as well. We start talking about other practices that are out there that do in fact tie really, really closely to ITIL, with little to, in some cases, to no overlap as well, which is really kind of nice to have. All right, so ITIL 4, why now? Well, things have changed. If you go back to ITIL version 3, which came out to the market around 2006, 2007, we had some updates. 2011, we had an update. We had a new publication come out, and I think it was 15 or 16, the ITIL Practitioner publication. Still a really, really great book, and a really great, well, was a great class, but it's a great book otherwise, and still out there. But things have changed. If you go back to 2007, I can think of one major practice right now that really wasn't even out there. Patrick Dubois coming, here comes this whole DevOps, right? 2008. 2009 gets into 2010, starts getting a little more traction. Agile, it was there, but still not like it is today. So a lot of things have changed, and what we've done with this is we've actually adopted, and we thought about those and brought those in to the ITIL framework, as we still kept most of what was in ITIL version 3, and we just made it bigger. We just made it bigger. I didn't think that was possible, but we did it. Well, they did it. I wasn't part of the on the foundation side, but the advanced, yeah. So we now incorporate all these different practices into consideration for ITIL, basically saying we as ITIL are not the only game in town. We must work with other practices as well. So the question is how. So we think about ITIL 4 and how it helps the business navigate through the emerging technologies and the acquisitions and leveraging things like blockchain technology, cloud services, anything as a service. We talk about the Internet of Things, even things like 3D printing, right? Depending on who you are in the vertical in the marketplace, ITIL has a solution for you. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. We'll start getting to some of these surveys and the results of these industry surveys that are out there. But it's also much more relevant to what we formerly called the entire service lifecycle and more. We bring in things like more governance practices and take in consideration things like COBIT and other ones as well. So we're looking at a much more holistic approach to what we're doing for true service management and delivering that value back to the consumers as we deem necessary. But we're always staying focused on what the business needs and the business initiatives are at that particular point in time of our journey of whatever it is we might be doing. From an educational perspective, we talk about ITIL 4 and how it emphasizes the importance of collaboration, building transparency and relationships amongst internal and or external consumers or stakeholders to make sure we understand the value delivery, which is a very, very subjective feedback typically. So we need to understand from the consumer's perspective, what is the value you're looking for, Mr. or Mrs. Customer? What can we do to enable that to happen? Well, you can read books, but the classes are great because they actually talk about real world scenarios, and we bring that into the educational space as well, not to mention the certifications. Right, so when you think about ITIL, I'm going to jump down the second block there on the left-hand side. We're talking about the context for ITIL 4 now is much more robust and a much stronger emphasis on that IT to business relationship, right? And the reason why I say that relationship between the business and IT, I've been in many organizations in my careers where we might have that us and them mentality, right? Us as IT, them as business, and vice versa, right? So we need to bust these silos down, and it really allows us and it guides us down the path how do we break these silos down in the organization to where we don't keep our blinders on, we take the blinders off. And one of the things we do talk about is how we think and work holistically as we collaborate and promote visibility of what the business needs are. So how do we do that? We have to do that by making sure we work collectively across the organization. And I guess really to be honest, services don't go this way, services go this way, right? They're going to span across multiple silos in the organization, which are typically structural from human resources and those types of things. But we need to think and work holistically across our service base because that's how services are. And if we remove any one of those components, we can compromise that value back to the consumer, and therefore finger pointing starts, which is not what we want to do. We want to make sure we bust these silos down and think and work holistically across the board. It also allows the consumer, the organization, to in fact have a common language. Now, does ITIL have a common language? It does. It does. Does Agile? Does Lean? Does Six Sigma? Does COBIT? Do they? They all do. But what ITIL really emphasizes is the fact that we need to agree on a common language. If we have service level agreements in place and we call them SLAs, let's just make sure everybody understands what an SLA is versus a contract of sorts, or knowing what an incident is versus a problem, right? I know everybody calls the service desk and says, hey, John, I've got a problem. We want to talk the same language, right? Call it whatever you want, but that's what ITIL kind of stresses, the fact that we need to have a common language that we can think of and work with within the organization, right? So when we think about the industry as a whole, again, ITIL has become the de facto standard. It has become the de facto standard. And with that, we've embraced it. And I'll talk about the technologies as well in a little bit. But look at this here. It's an interesting survey, and I've tried to bring this survey in to also show transparency. I don't want to show a survey and just give you all the good points and say it's all positive. Everybody's going to do ITIL. No, I'm not. But look at here. It says 78% of survey respondents feel that they already know about ITIL and what ITIL is. Now, in our survey here, 37%, I believe it was, John, that you had on the screen there, was had no idea. We aren't doing anything with ITIL. And another 26% was very little, right? So that's half. That's half of the audience here. So 150 individuals, call it 75 individuals. Yeah, it leaves a whole lot of room for what? Improvement. 70% of those have either taken an ITIL 4 exam or they are planning to do so. Now, that's a very high number. I personally think it's a high number, but ITIL 4 has been around for, going on, well, 3 years now, because I think I did one of the first classes in the world in Tokyo, March 1st of 19. I'll say the official one, right, where you had the exams and the course. But it's been around a little bit. So I think that's a high number. But they also qualify by saying, or they plan to do so in the near future, which basically says folks are looking at ITIL and ITIL 4 specifically to embrace that and ingrain that within their day-to-day operational activities. 20% of the organization is already adopting, or an additional 32% plan to do it as well in the future. Again, around half. Here's one study. There's around half of organizations that are out there, these respondents, and I believe there's 1,022 or something like that respondents. 7%. This is my transparency piece, right? To say it may not be for everybody. Now, some might say, yeah, we tried ITIL didn't work. I'm not sure it was ITIL that didn't work. Maybe with the way we adopted it and embraced it, or maybe the lack thereof, we chose not to do ITIL, we chose to go do something else. Fine. But at the same time, some just say, we're not going to do it. It's just it doesn't seem to be a value creator for us, and then we just choose not to do it. And that's fine. That's fine. Still many other organizations that are using it, and I've seen it, I've done it, I've worked with it, I've consulted on it with folks within Flycast, where we've done this and we've done maturity assessments. We've actually engaged with them to help them go down this path and adopt and adapt to these practices of ITIL. Verbatim as the book? No, it's based upon their needs. All right, so let's take a closer look at these components that make up ITIL 4. It is different. For anybody who's versed in ITIL version 3, it has changed. but most of the things in version 3 are still within ITIL 4 and one very specific piece, which is that second bullet there called the service value chain, which I think is where most of ITIL version 3 resides as a whole. So we have the service value system, which is the 5 core components. We'll see that coming up. And then we have the chain, but we also have what I really, really like what we did from version 3 to ITIL 4 is what we call the 4 dimensions, formerly known as the 4 Ps of, say, service design back in version 3. And we cannot separate the dimensions from anything we do. We can't separate any one of these dimensions because we have to execute and think about all 4 dimensions, and we can't pull one of these pillars away and say we won't do organization and people, or we won't do value streams and processes. We can't. We can't. They must all be embedded into our day-to-day operational activities as we progress from inception through operations up to and including retirement. And we'll always be taking consideration the 7 guiding principles, which is in fact the aspects of what we focus on within ITIL 4. So now you take the 7 guiding principles and those 4 dimensions, and I always say you intertwine those together, which we should always and forever, everywhere, then we build a really nice fabric for everything we do, whether it be ITIL or FitSM or Agile or DevOps or Lean. This is a really, really nice foundation for everything else to sit on. And we think about everything that we need to holistically, and then we leverage the other practices as we deem necessary for whatever we might be doing, up to and including tools and technologies. Continual improvement has now been more deeply embedded into ITIL as well. We've always had it, but we now talk about it a little bit more. So here's the 5 primary components that make up ITIL 4. The guiding principles, so 7 guiding principles. We used to have 9 in ITIL version 3. We've kind of truncated them and merged them into others, but we have 7 of these here that really kind of just all these things are just like subliminal. And we're always thinking about the 7 guiding principles, like focus on value and start where you are, and collaborate and promote visibility, think and work holistically, keep it simple. So we have these guiding principles that we should always be taking into consideration no matter what we do within the value system. And then we have governance practices that we have to take in consideration as well. Most every organization has to have some sort of governance practice in place. The practice is now in ITIL. Different than processes, we now have practices. Now, the difference, processes gave you a structured set of activities. Practices say, yeah, you need that, but how do you do that now? How do you do that with the right skills, the right people, the right tools? Then we have continual improvement, not to mention the service value chain. And the service value chain is a really, really neat componentized component of the service value system, because this is how we're going to traverse through what we call value streams, to create these value streams to traverse through the value chain in order to deliver that value. We need to think about what it is we need to do. One, we could have increased demand of new or modified services. Well, how do we enable that to happen to deliver that value back to the consumers? Well, that's where the value streams come into play. And we create these value streams to make sure we think about all aspects of what needs to be done to create and deliver that value at the very end. Or we may have new opportunities, and new opportunities or new ways of doing things, I think we've all been exposed to in the last 2 years. So that draws challenges. So what do we need to do to think about maybe these workflows or these most optimal flow of value streams, leveraging practices and processes and other business resources to get these things done? I'm a really, really big fan of these components that make up the service value chain, also known as where most ITIL version 3 sits. So we kept it. Not a lot of things changed from that. We just look at it differently now, as opposed to maybe a series of 5 books, almost like a waterfall of some sort. Right? So those are the components that make up the service value chain and the service value system, which is now the core of everything we talk about in ITIL, up to and including the expansion of those conversations in our book called Direct, Plan, and Improve, and the foundation book, and Create and Deliver Support, and all the other classes going forward are based on that. We talk about that and how we do certain things for certain needs in the organization. Here's another one where we talk about frameworks, right? Where using frameworks or processes, right? Maybe processes of frameworks. You can see where ITIL fits. That shows 47%. The other one, if you accumulate the other two, leads up to about 52%. So I think these two surveys are pretty close to one another, kind of showing the adoption of ITIL. I show you this one here because it's not just ITIL. There's other practices. The second one, where you take COBIT into consideration. I have to say that carefully nowadays. People get confused. Go with COBIT, right? So COVID-19. So that is a practice for IT governance, right? Another offering that we have. DevOps, another offering we have. That's gained a lot of traction. I think you'll see that move down the line even more so in the short-term future. FitSM, another practice getting a lot of traction in the market as well. So these are where organizations are at and what they're using for frameworks and or processes with certain types of practices that are out there. Microsoft Operations Framework, I thought was a surprising one, but it's there, right? So that's a viable option, right? Maybe call it Microsoft's version of ITIL, which is fine. But these are all, where organizations are at today. I show that to you because I think it's important to understand that it's not just ITIL. As a matter of fact, ITIL would be complementary to every single one of those practices that are on the board there. So when we think about ITIL and how it's complementary to other practices, let's talk about other practices, but let's talk about the verticals in the marketplace. One, there's no one size fits all, right? So what does ITIL do to accommodate you? We have many people online right now, and whatever the vertical is that you're in, whether you're in, a consulting firm, more than likely you're going to be ITIL certified, more than likely even COBIT or CISA, CISM or CISSPs, but it's all over the consulting firms. Finance, we have many different customers on the finance side, right? From 100,000+ employees to even smaller ones that are 50 to 75. Same on healthcare, right? We work with customers that are well above 100,000 employees, and manufacturing, and the sectors. If you're in the public sector, state, local, fed, or otherwise, if you're in that space, ITIL accommodates that. And we deliver these courses and consulting and other things as well we'll talk about. We deliver these to all the verticals that are out there, any organization of any size. I'll be in Rhode Island next week with an organization, and we're doing seven people in the class. Why?
Hey, Mike,
Yeah,
can I ask you a question, please?
sure.
So this is coming in from one of the attendees, and what have you seen? Because you talk about industry, you talk about many different industries, really any organization of any size. And one of the questions we received are, what have you seen as some of the industry challenges with adopting ITIL across an organization?
That's a great question. It's a loaded question, especially when you talk about across an organization. Some of the biggest challenges, there's a number of challenges that are out there. I personally, and what we've experienced out there, I think the bigger challenges that organizations might have is, say, individual contributors wanting to go down a standardized practice. I think we all want structure and stability, but a lot of times it's the individual contributor saying, I want ITIL, I want ITIL, I want whatever the practice might be. And then they have to sell that up to the upper management staff, right? So the management staff, in many cases, are late in the adoption, and therefore it doesn't propagate down like maybe it could or should. So I think the other challenge of that is the cultural side, where we don't have a culture that is going to embrace a practice such as ITIL for long term and make it become part of who we are every day. And we say things like, well, that's why we do it, because that's the way it's always been. Not that that's good or bad, but it needs to be adopted and brought into and modify the culture of how we do things. And that's probably one of the bigger challenges I see out there is we fight down here, and I say down here loosely, we fight as individual contributors. We need this, but sometimes management's not engaged with that, or even sometimes the management staff doesn't build a culture around that. When it starts up here and propagates throughout the organization, that's a much easier path to sell.
And another question. So in traditional organizations, and I've always been on the operations side. So for traditional organizations, we look at IT as a tool. It's a cost center. So you look at your P&L, it's a cost center. We almost look at IT as an afterthought. And now in today's world, obviously we want to change that to be a value center. and we want to make that into something relevant. And as you said something earlier about one of your attendees saying that they don't have IT projects, they have business projects. So in saying that, what, how can you, like, what are some of the things that you could potentially do to change the mindset, to start looking at the mindset as we're IT, we're here to help you. We're IT, we're here to solve a problem. We're here to provide value, not just think of us as a cost on a P&L.
Yeah, yeah, that's great too, because a lot of times that us and them that I kind of brought up is kind of going down that same path. We don't have IT projects, we only have business projects, basically saying we are in fact one. A lot of articles within CIO magazine, if anybody reads that, you'll see that there's a lot of comments, especially annually when they do the reviews or the studies and find out, what do you want to do this next year to make yourself better than the previous? And a lot of times the CIOs will put out these statements that are very, very simply said, but very, very difficult to do, which is we want to transform ourselves from an IT-based organization to a value delivery-based organization or a service-based organization. And that's easy to say, but then you go down the path of how do we get there to go make that happen? And that, I think, is where ITIL comes in as a practice, complementary to other ones as well, to help us guide us down that path to achieve whatever those vision, mission, goals, and objectives might be as an organization. Right?
Okay.
Real quick on something, these tool sets we all use. I mean, we have many people online right now. You may be familiar with some of these tools and technologies that are out there. Those technologies, in many cases, are developed against the practice of ITIL as a framework of ITIL. And as ITIL's changed, so has the tools and technologies. Now, I don't know that a lot of these tools and technologies like, BMC and Freshworks and ServiceNows of the world, that they're going to start changing their names of what they're doing because of ITIL 4 changing their names as well. I don't know if they're going to do that or not, but they're based on the ITIL practice. Right, so ITIL is kind of that feeder into how should the workflow of these tools and technologies come into play. So they're very, very complementary to what these tools, how these tools are being developed for the marketplace, so that they can go off and enable you to be more successful in your workflows of your processes and practices within the organization. Now, I think about a journey, right? And we go down the path, and kind of, John, it leads to that as well. If we're going to go down this path of doing any type of service management practices, more specifically ITIL, we need to understand what the business goals and objectives are, because that's that common goal, that's a common objective. We need to stay focused on what their needs are, our needs are, right? And making sure we identify what they need, when they need it. Now, obviously, we have these quotes out there, right? On time and within budget. What does that mean? Well, we can be on time and within budget, but we lost track of the vision, mission, goals, and objectives, and we still delivered at the very end. Did we deliver value or not? I think the answer to that would be no, right? So where do we start? We get this a lot with individuals. We'll go and do an ITIL class. We'll do a session like this here, which I know we're going to have many other sessions that are going to feed off of this session here. So stay tuned for those. We're going to add to this and get deeper and deeper and deeper into the ITIL stuff. Start where you are. What are your needs based upon the business goals and objectives? Let's start with what we have today. Don't reinvent the wheel, but let's start where we're at today, identify what's working, maybe what's not working, and start taking little bites out of this whole thing as we move forward. And then we take on more and more and more, and we become more and more successful. Certain things become more efficient, more time, more productivity. It just keeps going. Executing what you can effectively manage and control, right? A lot of times folks will say, we need to change operations. You can't effectively manage and control that, so let's bring this down to a proper level in which we can effectively manage and control what we're trying to do. Define those policies, those processes, roles, responsibilities, the things that we need to do. And if you don't already have the tool, then you acquire the tool to accommodate what your processes are, your policies are, and what your needs are holistically, and then bring the tools in. Then you get a much greater ROI out of those tools and technologies. I'm a big fan of driving awareness campaigns. Right? Drive awareness campaigns, typically mid-tier, upper-tier management staff, driving awareness campaigns of what it is we are trying to achieve based upon one's expectations, one's requirements, business goals, whatever it might be. But drive awareness campaigns so everybody's on the same page. And typically speaking, that might change their thought to, instead of just leveraging whatever it is, they may now want to contribute to the added value at the very end. And now we become much closer knit, become an IT service-based organization. Simulations. If you haven't done an experiential learning, some call them gamified learning, but these simulations, these are a must. If anybody's going to go down the journey of service management practices, these simulations are a must. One, they're fun, highly engaging. Nowadays, it's great because we're starting to get back to the office and do things. It's another way to get the organization to re-engage once again, because we've been remote for 2 years. So it's a great tool. Did this last week, do one next week as well. It's going to be fantastic. They always are, because everybody walks away going, oh, now I literally understand what ITIL is for, or other service management practices, and who we are as an entity in the marketplace. These are a must. These are a must, right? And we strongly recommend them within every engagement we have with you. ITIL education. I think ITIL education is key. Does everybody need to be certified? I don't think so. I don't think so. Define who needs to be certified. Define who needs to be attending advanced courses and the likes. As far as simulations, I think everybody, and not just in operations. We've done these for HR. We've done them for many others as well. So keep that in mind when you start thinking about going down that journey, right? First and foremost, again, identify what your needs are, and then think about the other aspects as well. But definitely think about additional education, but also the simulation as well. Okay.
Mike, I had
Yeah.
a question, and this from the audience, and you alluded to it on the previous slide, so I think you answered part of this question. So somebody asked, should we do our own operational assessment to identify where we are now to move forward, or do you recommend a third party? And of course, that's obviously why we're here. Do you look for a third party to come in and potentially do that assessment?
I'm a big fan of, and I'm not saying it's because we are that team that does that, right? I'm a big fan of having some sort of internal assessment, internal understanding, and there's tools you can use for that. There's questionnaires you could use for that. But I've seen the direct effect of somebody doing an internal assessment compared to when we will do the assessment for them after the fact, and it's night and day. The results are literally night and day. Right? We could ask the executive team, how do you feel your organization's doing in ABC processes? And they're, oh yeah, we're doing great. We're doing fantastic. We're solid in that one there. When in fact you ask the individuals who are doing it, it's a complete opposite answer. So that would be, I say, the internal, maybe a little bias associated with that assessment. I say always get a third party of choice to come in and give you that assessment, to give you a very objective baseline of a starting point. Yeah.
Okay.
Good
And
question.
then a follow-on question, and this is more for me. If I was looking to identify a third party, I'm looking for somebody to come in and help me. And obviously we know there's countless people out there that say they do this type of training, they do these types of assessment. But from your perspective, put yourself in the consumer seat. And from your perspective, what would you look for in an organization to say, that's the organization I need to have come in here and work with me on this assessment?
Yeah, another good one. That's from my perspective, I look at an organization, one that is tested, tried, and true in the marketplace, right? Typically speaking, they've been around a little bit. They have some significant engagements. Another is the cultural aspect of the organization. I personally have seen this where the culture does not align to who we are and what they are, and there's different beliefs and thoughts and ideas. Then that the culture just doesn't work well, and that actually causes a little tension as well, and that causes tension like in meetings, especially in the upfront interview type meetings. The other part is skill sets, right? Do they have the skill sets necessary to accommodate that? And if they don't, do they get access to the appropriate skill sets to enable the customer to be successful? Do they have those subject matter experts for whatever it might be? Are they leveraging standardized practices, say ITIL or DevOps or Lean or COBIT practices as well? But also, testimonies and maybe some good case studies of what they've done in the past as well. I think all of those are very complementary to assessing and evaluating a third-party organization to come on in, because if we're going to do this, I want to make sure that they are able, in fact, to do it, as opposed to putting it down in some sort of contract or document or SOW or something.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, so we have some classes coming up. All right, so I know I went through a lot rather quickly, but these are some options for you a little bit later on if you choose to go down the path of doing ITIL. You can keep an eye on us and see what other ones might be popping up. This is what's on the calendar today. Again, these are going to be virtual instructors, so these will be myself or somebody else on the screen like we're doing now. However, if you choose to do something on site, get with your Flycast representative and maybe that's something we could schedule for you as well, and do it in person and kind of tailor the message a little bit more towards your organization as well when we teach the 3-day class or the 4 or even 5-day classes if we need to for you as well. So keep these classes in mind. The advanced courses down below, the create, deliver, and support, probably one of the more popular ones right now. I'd like to say my book is, but it is still very important. It's a very popular class as well, but I think create, deliver, and support, but also driving stakeholder value. So those will be coming up a little bit later on after the summer. I think summer this year is going to be a little bit different than summer the last 2 years. People are going to go out, so vacation is going to be a big thing. So I just wanted to bring that to the table there as well. Okay.
So now I have a couple of questions, Mike, and then I know we've been asking questions throughout the presentation, so we've answered some of them already. One of the questions we received asked, how is ITIL 4 built in more cybersecurity? How has ITIL version 4 ITSM built in more cybersecurity? I want to say attributes or more like evaluation information. Has it built more into the model into ITIL 4 as opposed to ITIL 3?
Well, the answer to that is yes. Just because ITIL 4 compared to version 3, we used to have 26 processes back then. We now have 34 practices. So we've expanded the framework of ITIL to address many different things like cybersecurity and security. And then you bring down other practices and certifications, NIST and some other ones as well. But then also how the other practices are very, very complementary to ensuring we get those things done. Now, is ITIL the de facto standard for cybersecurity? No, we're not. That's not our forte. But we definitely bring in the practice to say that has to be taken into consideration. Here's an approach to make that happen as we leverage other practices as well, right? So it is different than what it was back in ITIL version 3. We had a process called information security management, and that was it. Staying focused on policies and procedures. Now we actually take into consideration other practices like the COBITs of the world and other ones like NIST and certifications, those types of things.
Okay, thank you. Another question. If I wanted to have a class, how many students do we need to have to run a customized course, and can it be done virtually?
How many? We call it a legal max of around 25. The most optimal course is probably 20. The minimum, it depends, but if we get 6, 7, like next week 7, but if we can get 7, 8, that's fine. But I also go down the path of saying we like to have a range, because when we, as you know, John, as we go forward, we try to embed that simulation into the course as well. So instead of it being 3 days of theory, it's going to be 2 days of theory. The third day is going to be the simulation, so you can experience what we learned, and then the fourth day would be continuation of theory and then exam preparation kind of stuff. So it's embedded into that, and that takes a minimum of 12 and a maximum of 20. Right? That's why I like to keep it around 20, because I think it's more it's easier to manage and still have everybody want to engage with that there. They can be done on site. They can still be done virtual as well. Virtual, obviously, it's still the same count type need.
Okay, all right, thank you. So those are all the questions we have, and I first want to say thank you, Mike. Obviously,
no, thank you.
I wish you're a little more passionate about the top. I'm just kidding. Mike is the guy. Mike is the guy, and he's infectious. Whether it's virtual or on site, Mike is the guy. I mean, you just want to learn more. And when he talks about these simulations, it's incredible. So if you have an opportunity, I highly recommend it. One of the other things I like to say is if anybody that attended the event today, first of all, I want to say thank you. But if you need, excuse me, any additional information about Flycast, about Auslyn Group, about the things that we do, the things that we discussed today, any other type of question that you have related to the two organizations, please don't hesitate to reach out to Flycast. You can go through our website. We have a phone number. you can contact, if you dial that phone number, somebody will come contact you almost immediately regarding your question. So again, I want to say thank you to everyone. I want to say thank you again, Mike, for your time and your expertise. And please, everybody, stay safe, and thank you for attending our event. Appreciate it.
Great. Thanks, folks.
Thanks.
Be safe. See you.